Testing. Good morning. We have quorum, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank you very much for everybody who is here to attend this Audit Committee meeting. Audit Committee meeting number 3. And to start off with, I'd like to have declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act. Does anybody have any interest that they wish to declare? Seeing none, then I call for the confirmation of minutes from May the 22nd, 2013. Margaret McMahon, Councillor. And all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Communication reports, none. So I'm going to go through the agenda once to see whether there's any holes. So we start off with the AU 3.1. I hold it in my name because we have a presentation from the Auditor General. Item AU 3.2, I will hold that in my name. Later, when we go through. Right now? Okay. All right. I've been advised that I should go through it one by one so that the people that don't need to be here can go back and perform their duties for our citizens. So I'll start off by item 2A, Exhibition Place, 2014 financial statements. Does anybody wish to hold that? Seeing none, I'll go to item 2B, the Hummingbird Center for the Performing Arts, Sony Center.
Mr. Chair.
2014 financial
Mr.
statements.
Chair.
Anybody holding?
Point of order.
Yes.
May I suggest, as we've done before, if we're not going to be holding an item, perhaps we can move it at the moment, and then we can relieve any staff or others who might be here to wait.
Well, I was advised to go through item by item in terms of the sub items, but if you want to go hurry it through, do you have any holes? Let me ask the committee members. Do you have any holes on this 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, 2E going through?
Indeed.
Okay, if there are no holes on this, I'll just, okay. Unfortunately, there are 2 new items for this, 2P, Heritage Toronto, and the report has not been circulated yet. It's been copied right now and been circulated. So other than that, does anybody have any other holes other than that? So I would say that let's move approval of the rest except for 2P. Councillor Matlow, moving that we approve the rest except for 2P. All those in favor? No opposed, carried. So the people that, don't need to be here can go back and do the work. I'm quite sure it's all piled up.
You're also welcome to stay and enjoy the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, except for 2P, Heritage Toronto, and we'll deal with that when we get the printed copies back. Okay, next item, AU 3.3, Arenas 2014 audited financial statements. Thank you very much, Councilor Nanziera. All those in favor? Approved. Item 3.4, Business Improvement Areas, BIA 2014 Audit Financial Statements. Any movers, any holds? Move recommendation. All those in favor? None opposed, passed. Item AU 3.5, Community Centers 2014 Audit Financial Statements. Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? Any opposed? Passed. Item AU 3.6, Sinking Fans 2014 Audit Financial Statements. All those questions? Recommendation? Councillor Holiday, all those in favor? Passed. Boy, moving right along. AU 3.7, Trust Funds, 2014, Audited Consolidated Financial Statements. Councillor Holiday, all those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, passed. Item AU 3.8, the status of financial audits of the city's agencies and corporations for the year ended December 31st, 2014. Any holds? We are very quiet. Councillor Nanziera, all those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, passed. AU 3.9, implementing an integrated city-wide risk management framework. All those, yeah. Any movers?
Presentation.
Oh, we have a presentation, sorry. I'm holding my name for presentation. Next item, AU 3.10, continuous controls monitoring, 12-month review of city telecommunications expenses, 2014.
Question, please.
Question, holding Councillor Holidays. Next item, AU 3.11, Auditor General Status Report on outstanding audit recommendations for city divisions. Any movers? Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? Passed. AU 3.12, Auditor General Status Report on outstanding audit recommendations for the city's agencies and corporations. Any movers? Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? Any opposed? Passed. Next item, AU 3.13, Auditor General's Office Forensic Unit Status Report on outstanding recommendations. Any questions? Any? Councillor Nanziera, the most recommendation. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, passed. Next item, AU 3.14, Annual Reports to the Audit Committee, Internal Audit Division Work Plan and Activities. Yes, moving approval. Councillor Matlow moves approval. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, passed. Next item, AU 3.15, Continuous Controls Monitoring Program, 12-month review of staff absenteeism.
Questions of staff?
Questions of staff, Councillor Holliday. Might be a fast question, all right? AU 3.16, Continuous Controls Monitoring Program, TTC, 12 months review of employees' overtime and related expenses, 2014.
I had a question.
You have a question, Councillor Holliday. Next item, AU 3.17, review of TTC bus maintenance and shops department, phase 2 audit, progress on implementation of audit recommendations. Any movers? Okay, Councillor Margaret McMahon. Give Councillor Holliday a little bit of time. Good, go? Okay. So moved by Councillor McMahon. All those in favor? Any opposed? Passed. Okay, now we go back to the beginning of our agenda. Thank you very much to the cooperation of everyone. AU 3.1, presentation by our audit department.
That was by staff.
Yes, the staff is going to be, are you all ready? Okay, the other one is not ready yet, so. Why do we proceed to the next item? Councillor Holliday had some questions. Okay, he's not here, so. Okay, we're on hold until we get set up then. So, Eddie, are you ready to proceed with AU 3.10 while they set up? Because you have questions? This continuous controls monitoring, 12-month review of city telecommunications expenses, 2014.
I did, and I guess there were two questions. The first was, and my observation on this, is that just like at home, suboptimally or not being 100% optimal in the way that we use our telecom services, there's often periods where the phones aren't used or things that can be canceled, things that need to be put on hold. I just wondered if in future procurements, if there was a way to build into the design of the procurement report backs or collaboration with the vendor to help reduce these little areas where there's leakage in our spending.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So we just completed the procurement at the end of last year, so we have a new contract. We did build in, based on the previous Auditor General's audit that just happened, we are building in ways to better monitor billing, and we're also looking at streamlining and speeding up the pace of which one of the audit findings was there was a long delay in terms of when those bills went out and were reviewed by management. There was like a 6-month delay. We've now shortened that time to about 3 months, and we're looking at shortening it even more. And we have built in, and we're looking at procuring either additional services on how we can monitor and continually look at and streamline the number of lines that we have. And we are making progress in terms of reducing underused phones, better matching the amount of minutes and plans to the actual user's usage. So yeah, we will do that, and we are doing it.
I find it the very same thing at home. We've got Rogers, we've got Bell, we've got different providers, and you just have to stay on top of what you're using and the bills that you're paying. I think we do that. We've got these great reports that show us these things. And when the renewal time comes up, that's when you start thinking about this stuff. You know, what can I do best, and how has my patterns changed? Is there Is there any recommendation, should this be referred to Government Management Committee, or should we revisit this at 3 years later and sort of consolidate what we've learned from these reports and look at them again when the procurement comes?
I would say that the best time to look at that is at the time of a procurement, and we just did a report that went to GMC and got approved at council, as I said, at the end of December. We do have an audit report that came last year. Was it last year or the beginning of this year? I forget what the timing of that was. And we will be reporting back on the progress of implementing those recommendations. So you will have another chance and you will see it.
And so the audit reports toe into that procurement design so that we're picking up the things that we're learning in the continuous monitoring in how we buy the goods and
That's
services. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? You want to move it? Okay, Councillor Holiday is moving it. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, carried. Are we ready now? Okay.
We are ready. I apologize.
All right, so now we go back to item AU 3.1, which is the City of Toronto 2014 audited consolidated financial statements and the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Audit Committee. Thank you for allowing Shirose Murgy and I to present the City's 2014 consolidated financial statements. The staff report that accompanies the statements provides details and highlights on the statements and helps give meaning to some of the numbers. This is an outline of today's presentation. We will start with a general overview. There were no major new changes in 2014. We will present the 2014 financial statements at a summary level. We will talk about differences in the way municipalities budget and the way we present our annual financial statements. We will discuss some key financial highlights. We will outline new changes in accounting standards coming for 2015 and future years. We will provide some concluding comments, and then we will respond to questions. It's always appropriate to remind the committee of the roles and responsibilities of management and the auditors. Management prepares the financial statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, established by the Public Sector Accounting Board, and maintains sound financial and internal control systems designed to ensure the proper recording, control, and oversight of the city's financial activities. The city's external auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, audit the statements and review and evaluate the city's control and financial systems in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. They provide an independent opinion as to whether the financial statements present a fair and accurate picture of the city's financial activities in all material respects. Joining us today from PwC are Kathy Russell, the engagement partner for the city, Marion Ma, the senior manager in charge of the audit, and Neil Rostant, the senior manager that assists with the audit. There are 119 entities captured or consolidated into the city's financial statements. Last year there were 118. It's up by one this year, which is the Toronto Pan Am Sports Centre Inc., which is 50% owned by the city, 50% owned by the university, and is proportionally consolidated. Our financial statements reflect the combined assets, liabilities, revenue, and expenses of the operating, capital, reserve, and reserve funds of the city and all of its agencies and corporations. The statements also capture the city's investments in government business enterprises, or GBEs, but these are not on a line-by-line basis. They are shown as investments on the city's balance sheet. GBEs are self-supporting business enterprises controlled by the city. Each of these organizations and GBEs prepare their own financial statements, which are presented separately to committee and council. I'll now walk through the city's 2014 consolidated financial statements. First statement we are going to review is the statement of financial position, which is the municipal equivalent of the private sector's balance sheet. The statement summarizes the financial position of the city at December 31st, which is our fiscal year end. The statement of financial position presents financial assets of the city, liabilities, net debt, which is the difference between financial assets and liabilities, non-financial assets, which are largely tangible capital assets, and an accumulated surplus, which represents the amount by which all assets, financial and non-financial, exceed liabilities. The city had financial assets totaling $8.4 billion at the end of 2014. Approximately 21% of that amount is our investment in GBEs, which are hydro, parking, and Toronto Portlands. The city had liabilities totaling $13.8 billion, so that our net debt is $5.4 billion, which is the amount by which liabilities exceed financial assets. The net debt is an important financial measure for the city and all governments because this amount has to be financed, and as such, it needs to be sustainable. The net debt has increased by $834 million during the year, largely due to our continued investment in capital assets. The city's non-financial assets increased by $1.6 billion to $25.3 billion during the year. Of the $25.3 billion, $25 billion is tangible capital assets. The remainder is prepaids and inventory. Although the accumulated surplus is large, its main component is tangible capital assets of almost $25 billion. The other main components are the operating, capital, and reserve fund balances, which total $3.7 billion. And please note that the negative capital fund of approximately $1 billion and the amounts to be recovered in this slide, the mortgages, debt, and unfunded liabilities totaling $8.7 billion, must be funded from future taxes or rates. Even though our accumulated surplus is high at $19.9 billion, it's important to recognize that tangible capital assets are non-financial assets because these assets do not provide liquidity or cash and are not typically available for sale. We can't sell the vast majority of our capital assets, our roads, bridges, community centers, etc., to generate money that can be used for other purposes because we need them to be able to provide services into the future. And in many cases, our assets are not income producing, such as roads, bridges, etc. The statement of operations and accumulated surplus is the municipal equivalent to the private sector's statement of income and retained earnings. The statement reports on a consolidated basis the revenues earned in the year, expenses incurred for the year, including non-cash items such as the amortization of tangible capital assets, and the annual surplus, which is the difference between the two. You will see that in 2014, the city earned revenues of $11.3 billion from various sources and incurred expenses of $10.5 billion in delivery of the city programs and services, leaving an overall annual accounting surplus of $0.8 billion. The $0.8 billion accounting surplus for financial statement purposes is different from the operating budget surplus reporting to Budget Committee, and we will explain the reasons for this difference in an upcoming slide. The next statement, the statement of change in net debt, is unique to governments. Net debt is a very important number for all orders of government as it's an indication of the reasons for borrowing. Toronto, unlike the province and the federal government, can only borrow for capital and not for operating. This statement helps us understand the activities in the year that led to the change in net debt. By adjusting the annual surplus to account for the impact of non-financial assets, which is largely tangible capital assets, explains the reason for the change in net debt. Starting at the top of the statement, you'll recognize $0.8 billion of annual surplus that we saw in the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. Included in that annual surplus is $871 million for the amortization of tangible capital assets, which is not a cash item, as we don't actually pay for amortization. It is a recognition of the cost of tangible capital assets that is consumed over the life of the assets. This indicates that the city had approximately $1.7 billion available to invest, and we actually spent $2.5 billion acquiring tangible capital assets during the year. After some minor adjustments, we show the overall net debt increased by $834 million, bringing our net debt at the end of the year to $5.4 billion. As this statement indicates, our increase in net debt is really driven by our net investment in tangible capital assets. The last statement is a statement of cash flow. Once again, we start with the annual surplus of $0.8 billion. We add back non-cash expenses of $793 million, which again is largely the amortization of tangible capital assets. We adjust for changes in non-cash assets and liabilities, which shows us an overall consolidated operating activities generated $1.9 billion in cash. However, we spent $2.5 billion in tangible capital assets, and on a net basis, we had higher inflows of $182 million, primarily due to dividends and distributions from GBEs, and net proceeds from debt financing activities of $281 million, leading to a decrease in cash for the year of $120 million. Before I turn the presentation over to Shai-Rose to talk about some of our financial highlights, I want to explain the difference between the way municipalities budget and the way municipalities must prepare and present their annual financial statements. This should clarify why our annual accounting surplus reporting in these financial statements differs from the operating budget surplus reporting in the year-end operating variance report. To begin with, the city's financial statements are prepared on a consolidated basis, combining the financial results of all agencies and corporations and our investments in GBEs. That includes tax and rate-supported financial statements, and it includes the activities of the operating, capital, and reserve funds. On the budget side, we have separate budgets for the city and each of its agencies and corporations. We have separate budgets for tax, water, and solid waste, and we have separate operating and capital budgets. So the annual operating surplus reported through the budget process only reflects the surplus of the city, not the ABC's, except for the portion of the ABC's surplus which is returned to the city. And it also includes the surplus for tax, water, and solid waste, which are reported separately to Budget Committee. In addition to the consolidation issue, another key reason for the difference between the two surplus numbers is that financial statements are prepared on a full accrual basis, whereas budgets are prepared on a cash requirements basis. On the financial statement side, the annual surplus includes expenses which do not require cash outlays, such as the amortization for tangible capital assets and changes in unfunded liabilities, while on the budget side, the annual surplus is based on cash requirements for operating expenditures and does not include certain non-cash expenses. Also, for financial statement purposes, capital assets are capitalized. They're recorded as assets on the statement of financial position and amortized over the expected useful life of the assets. However, on the budget side, capital expenditures are recognized as the asset is acquired or built. No amortization is recognized. Assets are fully written off as acquired. So the two surplus numbers will always be different for valid reasons, but we do balance it in our report and in a slide that's coming today. It's important to remember that the accounting surplus presented in the city's financial statements includes non-financial assets, basically our investment in capital assets. From a cash requirements perspective, the operating budget surplus is the key number that council should focus on. The staff report includes a reconciliation between the two surplus numbers on page 7, and this slide summarizes that reconciliation. We start with the tax-supported budget surplus of $190 million reported to Budget Committee in the 2014 year-end operating budget variance report. We add in a number of items, including transfers to reserves and reserve funds required by legislation or directed by council, various adjustments for non-cash items, as well as adjustments required under accounting standards, including changes in tangible capital assets, to arrive at the accounting surplus of $0.8 billion. So the two surplus numbers are different, but for valid reasons. And as I've already mentioned, the accounting surplus is not a cash surplus because it includes non-financial assets which cannot be sold to generate dollars for other purposes. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Shai-Rose.
Thanks, Mike. I will now go through the 2014 financial highlights. The first one is the city's tangible assets. The city's investment in tangible capital assets is significant and is critical in terms of city's ability to deliver services. Capital assets are recorded at historical costs and are depreciated over the expected life of the assets. We have $39.4 billion worth of assets at historical costs, less the accumulated amortization, resulting in a net book value of $25 billion. In 2014, we purchased $2.5 billion worth of assets, and in 2013, we had purchased $2.2 billion. This, offset by amortization of $0.9 billion, resulted in the increased net book value of $1.6 billion, which was largely in the assets under construction, which I'll talk about in the next slide. In 2014, the assets under construction amounted to $5.5 billion, which consisted mainly of TTC assets of $3.45 billion, city assets of $1.7 billion, TCHC assets of $116 million, and Toronto waterfront assets of $125 million. TTC assets under construction are mainly subways for about $2.1 billion, and the balance is buildings and rolling stock. Cities' assets under construction over $1 billion are in water and wastewater infrastructure, and the balance are in roads linear and Union Station. TCHC assets under constructions are for building and building improvements. Toronto waterfront assets under construction are for East Bayfront, West Donlands, and Central Waterfront. The next big highlight is the employee benefit liabilities. Employee benefit liabilities is a focus every year, as it represents the largest partially funded liability, other than mortgages or debenture debt. A full 7.5 pages of the notes in this year's financial statements, Note 13, is dedicated to providing additional information on these liabilities and providing a reconciliation between the last year's and this year's values. This slide summarizes employee benefits by entity. Due to various measures undertaken by the city to help contain the growth in this liability, such as reduced drug costs, reduced administrative fees, benefit plan changes, and changes in post-65 retirement benefits, the gross liability has been decreasing since 2011. However, with a decrease in discount rates in 2014, the gross liability increased by $506 million from 2013, with substantial increase in 2014, primarily due to decrease in discount rates and change in the Ontario government regulation in May 2014 to include additional cancers presumed to be work-related for Toronto firefighters. The improvement in the legacy pension plan is a result of the improved economy and better investment returns. The net $128 million in unamortized loss in 2014 is due primarily to decrease in the discount rate from 0.8 to 1% from 2013 to 2014, and partially offset by unamortized gains from differences between actual and expected benefit payments. The next big item is the net long-term debt and mortgages. Our net long-term debt increased by $261 million as a result of debt issuance of $652 million, offset by repayments of $316 million and sinking fund earnings of $75 million. This slide breaks down the debt issuance in 2014 by service. Debt issuance was in the transportation area, transit, and social housing. This slide shows that over the last 4 years, tangible capital assets have been increased by $5 billion, or 6.26% per annum, as compared to the increase in net debt of $1 billion, or 5.32% per annum. Clearly, our investment in tangible capital assets is the reason that our liabilities exceed our financial assets. We will continue to see our tangible capital assets increase, partly because we are paying 2014 costs to replace assets acquired at 1950 and 1960 prices. Debt has been contained through the capital budgeting process and the city's capital financing strategy. The fact that, on the average, our net investment in tangible capital assets has increased faster than our net debt is a positive sign. However, we need to maintain fiscal discipline to ensure that we continue to invest in assets and infrastructure while keeping the debt levels affordable. The next slide talks about comparison to the other cities, and the city compares favorable on its investment level, but net debt levels compare unfavorable to all but Montreal. I will now go through the upcoming changes in the accounting standards in 2015 and future years. The city will have to report liability for contaminated sites for the 2015 consolidated financial statements, as per the new public sector accounting standard PS 3260 for contaminated sites. This will require a lot of coordination and work with city divisions, agencies, and corporations. The city will need to establish a complete inventory of all sites for both the city, agencies, and corporation, except for GBEs. We'll need to assess whether the site is in productive use or non-productive use, or whether it's partial productive use. We will have to assess whether an environmental standard exists and whether contamination exceeds the standard. And we'll have to assess if the city is directly responsible or accepts responsibility. And the most important is whether a reasonable estimate of the liability can be made. Accounting services will take a lead on this project and will work with cities, divisions, agencies, and corporations. For future years, starting in 2017, we will have various new standards coming up, and they're all interrelated. The new financial statement presentation introduces a new statement, the Statement of Remeasurement Gains and Losses, which will reflect changes in the fair value for certain foreign exchange, derivatives, and portfolio investments. For 2018, new standards are required for related party disclosures, as well as assets, contingent assets, and contractual rights. While in 2019, a new standard will be required for restructuring transactions. More research will be conducted during the coming years to determine the impact, if any, of these standards on the city. The standards only apply to material items in the financial statements, and therefore some of these standards may not have material impact on cities' financial statements. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Shai-Rose. In closing, the consolidated financial statements provide comprehensive information on the city's financial performance during 2014 and its financial condition at the end of the year. The city is very disciplined in the management of its finances. We continually benchmark city operations with other public entities and Ontario municipalities, and we are firm in our commitment to continuous improvement and service efficiencies. A key challenge for the city is maintaining its significant assets and infrastructure in a state of good repair while continuing to invest in priority services and infrastructure as the city grows. The city's 10-year capital plan and financial strategies provide a solid financial plan for moving forward on state of good repair and growth needs. Because of the city's fiscal discipline, international bond rating agencies have confirmed that the city's financial position continues to be sound with AA and AA+ credit ratings. On a closing note, I'm proud to advise that for the 8th year in a row, the city has received the prestigious GFOA Award for Financial Reporting for its 2013 financial statements. Staff work very hard to meet the highest standards of financial reporting, which is not an easy task when you have over 119 entities to consolidate into the statements. We are managing our debt load within fairly conservative targets of 15% of property taxes, which is much less than the provincial max of 25% of all own source revenues. I want to thank and acknowledge the outstanding work and commitment of the accounting services team in preparing the city's consolidated financial statements and the annual financial report, particularly Shai-Rose Murgy, the Acting Director of Accounting Services, Stella So, the Acting Manager of Financial Reporting, and her team, Manel Daniel, Chris Phillips, Selvin Mogan, and Jennifer Kim. They all played a key role in preparing these statements, and that concludes our presentation.
Yes, Councillor Holiday, go ahead.
I may ask a question, because this is new to me, just learning about it. The contaminated sites, you mentioned there's a productive or a non-productive use. Can you explain the difference?
Actually, productive use means that they're still being used for their intended purpose by the city. Non-productive use would typically mean that it's vacant or being considered for disposal. It's not being used.
What if it's a road or parkland or a piece of land that, so we're not talking about like a waste transfer station, but just a holding that we've got that's green space? Is it treated differently? Maybe this is too technical, but are they treated differently? What I understand is we have a lot of tangible assets, but they can't ever be sold because there's no practical way we could sell a roadway or that sort of thing. So are those sites accounted for differently? Is the value, I guess, of the contamination liability treated differently because of those categories of lands?
I don't believe so. What we are doing is getting the inventory and understanding what the use is, and that there is an environmental standard that we are not meeting that we need to meet. And
Okay.
so that the liability is driven by all of the above. If, on a general basis, if the land is being used as it was intended, if it was there for a park and is being used as a park, then there wouldn't typically be a liability.
Okay.
If there was a contaminant that was a problem and it was fenced off and not being used as a
Right.
park, that would be.
And we wanted to sell it, there would be a big liability on that piece of property because you couldn't trade hands without dealing with the contamination. But if it's always going to be what it is, do we have to consider it a liability or treat it in a different way?
The general answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions myself. Anybody else before I ask them? In the slide 27, which is upcoming changes for future years, do we have kind of a forward-looking impact on any of these changes that would be provided to the councillors to give us an idea of what those, what the impact on our financials are? I think that would be from the CFO.
Well, a lot of these things, through you, Mr. Chair, because we're not doing them now and they're upcoming changes, when we go to start implementing them, we'll have to assess what the impacts are. The one in 15 on recording contaminated sites and that additional liability, that will have an impact on your net financial position and the net bottom line. Some of these others, like, so for example, the change in financial presentation in 2017, that won't have, I can't see that having, those kinds of presentation changes having a material impact. All of them will involve, additional work and resources to implement the changes. It adds a certain amount of complexity to the financial statements. But I don't think these ones, Mike may want to comment in terms of how big or small does he think these impacts will be.
And we don't anticipate material changes. However, we have not done all the work yet, so that, the devil's in the details.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, any movers? Yes.
Could I just speak for a minute? I just wanted to say, well, first of all, good morning, everyone. But thank you so much for all your work you've done. It's really impressive that you've won the GFOA award for the 8th year in a row and helped to keep our credit rating up at an AA+. It's great. Thank you so much for all your work.
Okay, and you're going to move it? Yes. Councilor McMahon moves for approval. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, approved. And we move to, now, before we move to the next item, which is the handout has been provided, which is 2P, Heritage Toronto. Do you want a chance to read through it, scan through it before you, so let's move on to the next presentation before you come back to that, all right? Yes? Oh, okay. On the first item? Yes. Oh, okay, sorry. I wasn't briefed on that. Okay, we got to reopen. Okay, reopened item 1 because I was informed that we have to get. Okay, I move for reopening.
Through you, Mr. Chair, committee members, if normally there is an opportunity to ask the external auditor some questions, if you want.
If you want.
If you're fine, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then that's fine.
I gave them an opportunity to ask questions and they didn't, so anyway, so let's move for approval again. Margaret, Councilor McMahon, all those in favor? Okay. You're free to go now. Thank you very much. You did a great job, so we don't have to ask any questions. Our staff did a great job, and you as well. Thank you. So let's move to the next item for presentation, which is AU 3.9, implementing an integrated city-wide risk management framework. And in the meantime, you've got time to scan the item 2P. Much appreciated. We'll come back to it.
Good morning. First of all, thank you to the Audit Committee, and thank you to just on the follow-up items through the that have all the hard work that's been done by the city to implement as many recommendations as they have, and all the items that they've have been included in our follow-up report. So thank you to everybody at the city. Our report is on the implementation of an integrated citywide risk management framework. Ina Chan sits with me today, and she's the senior audit manager on the project. At the bottom of the screen, what you see is really the value chain of how the city takes its strategic plan and implements measured outcomes. You take the city's tax dollars, you apply all of the oversight and planning to put things into place, and you have outputs and outcomes to make sure that the vision of the City Council is achieved. And I wanted to provide some oversight in relation to stewardship over tax dollars, and the reason that I'm doing this is because risk management is a key component of that. The first line of defense when tax dollars are spent is controls that are in place, and those controls are implemented by the city manager. The second line of defense to make sure tax dollars are spent appropriately is to make sure that there is a monitoring, and part of that is risk management. And at this point in time, the city doesn't have an integrated citywide risk management framework. It does have several initiatives that analyze risk around some capital projects. Everything is listed in Appendix 3. Capital projects, Toronto Water divisions have different ways to analyze risk, and the city manager can speak more to that. But there's no citywide risk management framework. When there is a risk management framework, it's a dashboard, it's a tool so that city manager and council can monitor risks. One of the questions that was asked this morning, for example, is what are the impacts of the upcoming accounting changes on the financial statements in relation to financial liabilities? That would be something that would be thought of and would be on the risk management register. So always at the forefront of city council's mind, you would understand what the risks that are facing the city. Another risk, for example, would be whether we would receive provincial funding. Last year, I remember being in the budget process, and there were some changes during the budget process. Having that at the top of mind, a dashboard prior to those situations occurring, allows the city to plan better. The third line of defense is internal audit. So internal audit verifies the internal controls. It helps to make sure that the programs are operating efficiently and effectively, and it's a tool for management. The fourth line of defense is the external auditors. That would be myself, the Auditor General, and the auditors, PwC, the auditors of the financial statement. And the fifth line of defense, the bastion that makes sure that tax dollars are used appropriately, the full overseer is City Council. These are all the tools that should be coming to the Audit Committee and Council to make sure tax dollars are used effectively. And as you see here, we have internal audit, we have discussions about controls, and we have external audit. And we do have some performance monitoring, but risk management is an area that's missing. So why is it important? Well, financial control and risk management is central to managing an organization effectively. And this is from the Auditor General for Canada in 2003. So risk management is important. It contributes to an organization's ability to safeguard assets. You're looking forward. You're trying to understand the impact of interest rates and the impact of environmental liabilities, the impact of the expenditure in a capital. So that is a very important aspect. A risk, when we talk about a risk, it's the likelihood of something happening and the impact on a future event. And really what we're talking about is, if City Council has objectives, it's the risk that we might not achieve those objectives in a cost-effective way. So what could happen that our money could be spent inappropriately? What could happen if the performance isn't done, and what's the impact on citizens in the city? Good risk management balances negative risks with leveraging opportunities. It's looking forward to see what could happen, but they could be good things. And it includes operational, strategic, reputational, financial, environmental, and legal and compliance risks. So what's the key here? First of all, the key is not to avoid risk. There's always risk. It's about managing, and it's really about identifying and prioritizing the likelihood and the impact of opportunities and threats. And compliments of Toronto Hydro, they have moved along in their risk management framework. TTC is also here. They have moved along in their risk management framework and the risk assessments. And this is one of many dashboards the City Council could have to fully understand the likelihood of something happening and the impact. And on this demonstration chart, you can see there's some that are approaching the red and the yellow. So the items that are down in the blue, the low blue, they're matters that you may not choose to manage because it might cost too much. But as you move up into the yellow and the red, you certainly want to be actively managing those risks. So this is just a sample. And I talk about optimizing risk-taking and costs of risk. It's not about not taking risk, it's about taking the right level of risk and making sure that it's on the forefront of people's minds what the impact is, and City Council's mind. So why is it important? A sound and systemic approach to risk management distinguishes managing effectively from merely coping. And it's not only vital to managing resources more effectively, but it's ultimately will contribute to the effective use of public resources and the public service. Again, the Auditor General for Canada identified that this was an important area back in 2003. Keep in mind, the city was amalgamated, just a number of years back, and is maturing. So this is something that is just ready to get more enhanced as we're going. It's not a criticism, it's an opportunity. Right now, TTC is just getting underway. We're ready to get underway as a city. And most cities you'll see, and large organizations have this. So what's in place? What we have in place is 16 out of, I'll actually have Ina speak to this, what's in place. Go ahead, Ina.
16 out of the 58 city divisions, departments, agencies, and corporations have indicated to us that they have formal risk assessment processes. Other city divisions that don't have formal processes have informal processes in place. And there are a number of initiatives going on currently to formalize risk assessment processes throughout certain city divisions even now, and that's indicated within the report.
Thank you. And what opportunities do we have? It's important to make it citywide. We have a $11 billion corporation. It's important to make it citywide. It's important to have a consistent framework, and that framework should float up to City Council in a digestible manner where the risks can be fully understood. And it's important to integrate the risks. Make sure we're all talking the same language. So how is the city doing? Right now we're lagging, but part of that is a function of the amalgamation and coming forward. We're now positioned to move forward, and it's really important to take that opportunity. If you look at municipally, we have a number of cities that are smaller than Toronto, and they've implemented the risk management framework. Provincially, and these would be larger than the city, they've moved ahead with an integrated risk management framework, and the federal government continues to move forward. It's mostly has it in place. In 2011, it was a positive report from the Auditor General for Canada on the federal government. So it is time now to really turn our minds to managing proactively the risks that the city could be facing. So the recommendations are to have an appropriate enterprise risk management framework and to start the planning around that, to have the appropriate resources to consider this, the tools, and finally, it's to make sure that the mechanisms are in place to track and to monitor risks. I have one last slide, and this is compliments of Toronto Hydro again. This is not an overnight exercise, and it's not simple. It's important, it's critical, but it's important to also recognize that there's planning that has to happen, and the city needs to turn its mind to it. And it could be a five-year program to mature if the city started to embark on it today. So it's going to take some time. So this is the journey of Toronto Hydro. I know that CTC is experiencing the same journey, but it will allow, if the journey is complete, it would allow for more effective and proactive management of risks. Would you like to comment, John, or?
In anticipation of the question, I would say management supports the recommendation that you have before you today. The city is maturing. Its scale warrants a look at integrated risk management. There's a comment on page 4 with the chart that the Auditor General showed you around expected enterprise value and risk levels. So the recommendation is for the city manager to come back and lay out a timeline and a work program to hit that sweet spot on that chart, which is balancing the point of diminishing return where cost actually outweighs the benefit. So you don't want to boil the ocean. You want to be strategic. You want to be thoughtful in assessing your risks and undertaking plans to mitigate it. It will take considerable effort. This is not trivial. It will require significant resources for us to do this. It, I believe, is more than worth it. We've got enough planning time ahead of us to build this into our plans. It will be better for having done it, but it is a 3 to 5 year journey for the city to have a common framework to risk assessment and managing those risks. So in summary, management supports the recommendations you have before you today.
Thank you very much, and I'd have Councillor Matlow asking questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In a private corporation, there'd be a little more control over, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, a little more control over how budgets are produced, where the resources are coming from, and how the outcomes are going to be achieved. By the nature of this corporation, things are very fluid because they're political. You gave an I think you alluded to an example of the last budget process when we were told that we were going to have some money, then we were told that we didn't have the money, and that was based on a bizarre governance model that we have in Ontario where we don't have a predictable and sustainable flow of funds for infrastructure, but there was haggling over the Toronto pool and the pooling funds, and there was an indication by some that there might be funds available, and then they weren't sure, and so these kind of risks are difficult to, and by the way, and I just say this as a preface to lead to the question, they're just hard to determine sort of what the risk is when you, well, I guess the risk is just the lack of predictability. There are also cases where council will make political decisions. Others would disagree with me, but I would suggest that the decision for the 3 subway stops in Scarborough was a just absurd waste of money, and it was done for political reasons. When you have these risks, the council will make decisions that are wasteful, or we simply cannot determine whether or not we're going to have the funds from the federal or the provincial governments for infrastructure. How much merit is there to put a lot of resources into risk assessment when we don't actually have a better governance model to better predict what kind of funds we're going to have each year for our major priorities?
Well, the Auditor General for Canada and I and the City Manager agree that the view is worth the climb. There are risks that can be predicted. There's operational, environmental, legal. There's many. Political is a little bit more fluid. I absolutely agree. But if today we found out that our funding was cut back by a certain amount, what would be impacted and what's the risk of that happening? Last year it was higher. This year maybe we know what the risk is, the likelihood of the risk, because we know our budget, the money's coming might be a bit lower. So with this information right now, the city is or should be planning with these kinds of thoughts in mind, not overcommitting our resources. And it's basically capturing those, putting thought to them, and thinking about the plan B. So it is common in municipal, provincial, and federal governments where there is some political uncertainty to still do as much risk planning as they can, but it's not.
Are you speaking more like about, for example, the land transfer tax and trying to get ahead of the curve about sort of looking at where home sales are going to be projected to be next year and what kind of revenue we're going to be bringing in, and looking at what we want to do about that now before we get doing an environmental scan, looking to the next steps, rather than things that we're voting on or waiting for other levels of government to contribute?
It's really about looking forward to identify the revenue and the expenses that we know of, and the impact. And then where you get to a point where it's more uncertain, it's about recording that and just being aware of that. If there's political, if there's political information that funding will decrease, your likelihood is going to go up, and you're going to make different decisions because of that. If your funding politically you think is going to increase, and there's solid information and the likelihood is high, you might make different decisions. So it's a fluid and dynamic process. It's at a high level, but it's really making sure that the city management and city council keeps its eye on the ball, looks forward, and is able to make more nimble adjustments based on the risks that are there. So if we know, so that's. Yeah.
Thank you.
So does that help you at all?
Partially.
Partially.
Thank you, and Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd always considered enterprise risk management as one of those things that depoliticizes the delivery of services and the way that we execute our mandate as a city. but there was always a political layer, and I'd always thought of that as the risk appetite statement. And that's where you have the good fight at council. And it's maybe where you'd have the fight in a private corporation at the board of directors or the senior management level to figure out what those appetites are. How did the other cities do it? How did they get through that layer or that journey to set what their appetites were, and how do they revisit it every time there's an election?
It's in all risk management processes, it's really about the players sitting together to define what their appetite is. How much risk do we want to have in the process? And how much information do we have? If we don't know if we're going to be receiving money at all, then why would we be overcommitting? So it's really about getting the discussion going across the corporation, understanding and making sure that we collectively define what our appetite is for risk going forward, and then managing to that. I think one of the benefits that's going to come from this is because we've amalgamated, and right now there are some silos within the city, it's really going to start that discussion and really raise up the true picture of what the risks are. And the issues around, or the challenges around the political decisions really are on top of all of the other risks, and it might help you to make better informed decisions from City Council's level if you have more information.
And maybe it's more of a suggestion, but or can we build in a procedure, excuse me, whether it's an annual review or it's the creation of a document or a charter or a table or something at the political level that allows council to make its statements with respect to risk management. And then that becomes the document or the piece that management refers to as they design all of the processes and they execute all of the enterprise risk management. And that's kind of like the top of the pyramid. And that's where the political folks we can put our inputs into this system. And there's a built procedure rather than kind of taking it runs at different pieces throughout the year or throughout the processes.
Mm-hmm. That would be certainly for city management in their planning and research and especially research with other municipalities, the Ontario government, the BC government, and federally, to provide council with feedback on what best helps them. I think it's really important on that note to leverage a lot of good work that's already been done. So people have been working on this since 2003. And before that. We have groups within the city that are actively working on that and across other governments. And there's really great work that has been done, and they've faced all of the questions that you have, and it's really important to leverage that. The caution that I have is don't go too detailed. That's one of the things that the city manager brought up. We don't want to manage every single risk if the impact and the likelihood is low. It's really about seeing what we have, identifying the high impact items, and then moving from there. So certainly let the city manager do the planning, leverage what we have, and then make sure you don't go too detailed.
If I could, Mr. Chair, when the city manager comes back with a report on an integrated risk assessment for the city, it'll be important for him to frame the city's risk tolerance, approach to risk, seek council's authority to enable staff to take managed risk. Currently, our risk tolerance on any individual file is not guided by that type of framework. You can rapidly get to a point where if you sustain an idea that risk is not acceptable, you can grind things to a halt. And we see echoes of that every once in a while. On the other hand, we don't want to see risky behavior on staff or put ourselves in positions where we'll take an unwarranted risk. So I think the framework should very much help establish the standard with council's blessing for risk tolerance, procedures to assess those risks, and clear up places where we might be getting overly either aggressive or passive on risk in the corporation. I think it'll very much help us in that regard.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Seeing none, anybody to speak? Yes, Councillor Matlow.
To really just to follow on and just make a comment based on the questions and answers that I received. Of course, this is an important initiative, and I think it's always important, no matter whether you run a government or a small business, to manage your risks and make sure that you know where the light switch is when you walk into a room. And I think that's responsible, and it's that is good governance. I just the cynicism that I think that I expressed, but I also have hope and optimism too. Is that I've seen this council far too many times, while it does remarkable and inspiring work very often, make completely disingenuous decisions for political reasons. And that you cannot manage proactively unless you have a group of people who are determined to make fact-based, honest decisions, regardless of the politics on the ground at the moment. So it's hard to predict that, and it's hard to predict kind of what the big issue of the day will be at that moment that will then see $1 billion go out the window. So that's just part of our nature, and I think that we need to work on that as a group. And then the other issue is that we have a governance model provincially and federally, well, just nationally, that doesn't have clear paths towards predictable, reliable funding for major infrastructure projects. It's a cap-in-hand, haggling kind of dynamic where if you happen to have the right mayor and the right premier and the right prime minister or the right minister or the right who like each other or enjoy going for coffee with each other, and they have the same political stripes, or they have some common interest, or we're right around election time, or then sometimes you can get ribbons cut. And then the rest of the time, it's about everybody wanting to come to the table if they can announce things, but not if they're asked to bring a checkbook. So we've got to figure that out too. And until we figure out those two incredibly complex, incredibly difficult questions that have been probably asked since the beginning of democracy, but until we figure those out, it is going to be incredibly difficult to assess what risks we have ahead of us, because sometimes we are the creators of our own risks. And at least those we can try to mitigate more collectively as we move forward as a group. Thank you. And I'd be
Thank
happy
you.
to-
And now, before recommendation, anybody else to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to say a few words myself. And risk management, that's why I like the wording here, framework. It is a framework. You cannot put anything really concrete down because it's all constantly changing. And I used to have the role of a business continuity role to define that. And it's a cost, it's a net cost. So for people to come to the table, they're very busy trying to generate revenues. So when you ask them and they're not generating revenues, okay, it becomes kind of a elastic framework that they got to expense time to look after this, to put the framework together and define certain things that will occur. And it's very difficult because it becomes a cost. It's not, revenue generator. So for our staff to do that, I think we need to help them to understand the risk. And then you got to categorize it in terms of whether it's going to put you out of business or not. Similarly to the ice storm that occurred at the beginning of last year. Okay, a lot of people can say, we should have had a lot more in place, right? But if we do have a lot of systems in place to handle such an event, which is maybe 1 in 100 years, then our cost of electricity goes up because we have to support that infrastructure. So it's a very elastic, balancing kind of thing that we need to do. So I have to make people understand. Okay, the residents out there, they were out for 6 days, including myself, out 6 days. But I had to handle a lot of residents that says that, why is my problem not worked on? So I had to explain to them, I say, we had to get the subways running first, okay, because they're out. No different than the other day when we are out for about 90 minutes, when our backup system failed as well. Okay, so how much redundancy do you want to build into the system? There's a cost to it. It's not a simple case, let's have it all, because running a company, running a city, is not an easy thing to do. So you got to, against balance, everything out. So having said that, I hope that we do a good job on managing that risk, because it's not really a science, it's an art. And having to communicate to our residents that, hey, sorry, you're going to wait an extra few minutes. So anyways, so our work is cut out for us to make our residents and our, bosses really to say, understand that we have to somehow manage. So thank you, and can I have a mover to approve? Councillor Matlow, all in favor? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yeah. So the AU 3.2 2P, which was Heritage Toronto that we held down, that was circulated. So
when we go back to this, I have
I was just going
a mover to reopen 2F for a motion.
2F.
Yes, 2F, sorry. Yeah, 2F. We got handed an update, and the eagle eye of Council Holiday, he spotted something that he wants to so reopen it and move a motion. So all those in favor of reopening 2F? Carried. Councillor Holiday?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know about an eagle eye, but just a question. There is an item in here where, in the PwC letter, there is a bit of a discussion about contributions and pension payments, and I guess there isn't some resolution at this point in time. So my motion is very simple. It's just that the Audit Committee requests the Auditor General, in consultation with Toronto Parking Authority officials, to report to the next meeting of the Audit Committee on October 23rd, 2015, on the details related to the undercontribution of employee pension payments by the TPA. And just for your reference and convenience, that question relates to item 3.2F that we got today, and it would be the bottom of the first, second, third, fourth page. It's the last item. It's page number 2, but it's the fourth page of the package. And if we can just get some follow-up on that, that would be wonderful.
Okay. All those in favor of motion? Passed. And now on 2P,
Yeah, now, yeah, I can move that.
you move it? Okay, all those in favor? Item as a whole? Passed. Thank you, and now we move on to our next item, which is item 315. Councillor Holiday, you have questions of staff?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the rhetorical question is, so what? The report tells us that we've had an increase since last year in sick leave, and I guess it says 8.2% when you look at the hours. And I've just been scratching my head as to why and what to do about it. We've got a great continuous monitoring process, and I guess this is the canary in the coal mine, or the first red flag that something's happened. And my question is to, I guess, staff in general, whoever can take this, do we have benchmarks that we can compare our absenteeism against to see if we're any different than anywhere else, or if it was just a bad winter for sickness or some other trend that's going on?
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there's public and private sector benchmarks. We're a little higher than some of the public sector standards that we would like. As a result of the report, I've asked all the division heads to give me a detailed accounting. I'm in the process of collecting that. I have a meeting on Monday with the DCMs to talk about our attendance management program and how it's working. initial reactions to the report had the additional pay period. It was described in the Auditor General's report. We've had more staff, we've hired more staff, our vacancies are down, that means the hours are up. We've seen an increase in the number of long-term illnesses. There are some collective agreement issues that we need to attend to, and generally the workforce is on average almost a year older. So we will be diving into this a little bit more in depth, and it is a concern, even though it's relatively flat to 12, just the nature of the increase warrants us to go in and do a deeper dive with each of the divisions. So that's underway.
And I guess sometimes people are sick, they're sick. And sometimes, through our own experience as humans, sometimes we take sick days because we're unhappy or something else is going on. And if we can be very proactive as an employer to see that early on and work towards a solution. I'm not saying that's what it is, but the red flag is there, and I think it's incumbent on us to start to ask those questions. Is, where is this happening? Why is this happening? What can we do to mitigate it? And then ultimately, we're talking about productivity. I guess, and the last question is maybe rhetorical. I don't know. Is this something that should be referred to the Employee and Labor Relations Committee later? Now, I don't know, just for their consideration as well. I don't know what the procedure is when we're looking at this.
Mr. Chair, I think Alison Anderson would like to comment on it.
Through the chair. Yes, we through the last Auditor General's report, it was recommended that we report back to Employee and Labor Relations Committee annually. So our first report will be in September, and we will be coming to you with benchmarking data at that meeting as well, because we do compare ourselves to Stats Canada and the Human Resources Benchmarking Network. So all that will be before the committee in September.
Great. Are we able to get any information from our benefits provider to see if there's a correlation in benefits payments or prescriptions or that kind of thing to see how it matches against absenteeism, like sick absenteeism? I don't know if it's possible. It's just a thought.
When we're looking here at sick days,
Yep.
We don't have an external benefit provider for our short-term sick days here.
Okay.
But when we do compare to other organizations, municipalities, and Stats Canada, we have that information as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And questions?
Thank you. And so do you think that gapping has anything to do with this, with maybe people doing a heavier workload because they're covering for a position that hasn't been filled, and then they're getting fatigued and ill and need to take time off?
I don't know that anybody has a precise answer to that. I would say that in our efforts to fill vacancies, which have been successful, although the churn causes us to not fill them as quickly as we'd like, so we're filling more jobs. You would expect then that the absenteeism would go down. Well, we've seen it gone up last year. So I think it takes a more in-depth investigation on our part. It varies across divisions. I do worry about some of the productivity morale issues that were raised. We'll certainly look at the gapping. If there's some of that, we'll look at that in the
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anybody to speak or the question? To speak, Councillor Matlow.
I was going to say this is an exercise in risk management. So, so for those of you who are new to the committee, thank you.
Thank you. And okay, this is yours. Nobody else to speak to move motion?
Well, I'll be very brief just to speak and move the staff report, of course, but just to me, it's very important that we do something with this. We've asked the question, we got an answer back, and that in itself is a good process and proves its value. And now the onus falls on us to try to understand further why there are more absences this year. And I'm not going to say this in a critical way that there's more. The most important critical question is now to ask why, and then how to solve that. And I'm quite confident from the answers that I've got is folks are taking a further look, and we'll hear more about how we can address this as an organization. And I'm pleased to move the staff recommendations that we received this report, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Holliday. And, many of these reports, I'm going to say a couple of things first. Many of the reports brought forward by Auditor General, and we need to give time to the management to address and bring back updates and action items and so on especially. So I believe that in looking at this report that they're moving along. So I'm willing to allow them the time to address the issues that's brought forward in the report. So Councillor Holliday moves motion to receive. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, passed, carried. And coming to the next item is AU 3.16. And Councillor Holliday was holding for questions. Please proceed.
Thank you. I think these will be relatively brief as well, but in the report we have a very detailed table that says overtime statistics by department, and then we've got some comment about some of the reasons why there was overtime. And the one that stood out to me, of course, was some of the major capital work. Subway closures around Union Station, I suspect in here as well some of the signal work. But could someone help me understand the correlation to that capital work and the particular departments that had an increase in overtime? And the inverse of that, of where we didn't talk about capital work, why do the other departments have an increase in overtime if they're not related to those type of projects? And is there someone here?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Vince Rhoda from TTC.
Thank you.
How are you? So the way it works for the subway closures is it's a couple of things that cause the overtime. Actually, three things, and I'll explain all three things about it. The first is that our crews work, 24 hours through that closure. So we'll have lots of people who are working. We'll schedule what we can schedule, but a lot of that's outside the regular work. So the actual maintenance crews that are working on the installation of the signal system and other work like that work would be overtime, and those would largely be in the rail infrastructure department. But in addition, if we've got to then, because the subway's closed, we're going to have to do a couple of things. We're going to have to run parallel buses. So you'll see increased overtime in the bus departments, bus transportation for that, perhaps streetcar, perhaps subway, depending on the extra service we're running. Then in the stations area, that's where our station staff is. Certainly where there's closures, we will have staff in those stations helping direct our customers. So that's part of why you see so much in those areas. I'll point out that all the cost associated with the closures, all the overtime associated with the closures, is actually charged back to that capital project. So it's not against the operating budget, it's part of the project. The plant maintenance department doesn't have a big increase in here, but they would have some overtime that goes along with it. So that's the bulk of the departments that you'll see where there is some overtime. There are other areas, like our transit enforcement group as well, would have extra people out there during those closures. So once you get past that, you've accounted for almost all of the big areas where there are overtime, and then you're in like one or two or three people here or there that top over these amounts. So it's the closures that had the overwhelmingly big impact on those things.
Okay, and that's predominantly covered through the projects is what I think I heard.
That's correct.
Okay, and the other piece was the gapping. It was one of the, I guess, the general examples as to why gapping, it was $15 million higher.
Right.
Were there areas of concentration where there's gapping, and why aren't we filling the positions if this is another pressure indicating point?
So, I mean, we have a lot of jobs to fill, and sometimes they don't get filled as quickly as you want them to get filled. It takes some time over the course of the year. But that wasn't, I mean, if we look at the answers for why there was an increase in overtime, we had about a $5.3 million increase in overtime. Almost $3 million of it was the weekend closures.
Okay.
Another $1.2 million was the very bad weather earlier on in the year. So over 4 million of the 5 million is explained by those two things. So the gapping didn't translate into a lot of overtime for us because a fair bit of that gapping came on capital projects that didn't proceed. So we try to fill those jobs. In fact, when we're doing this year's budget, we're paying an awful lot more attention on when a project starts, you know, when you realistically going to get those people on board. So some of the gapping happened because the project started a little later, but it wasn't a big cause in the overtime. Those first two things were the biggest reason for the overtime.
So I didn't want to have a gapping discussion, but what were the primary drivers for the large gap?
So some of it was vacancies. We did have, turnover, and some of that took a while to fill. Some of it was, as I said, projects starting later in the year than were originally anticipated to start. Some of it was, we had a big increase in. We're going through a fairly large turnover, and certainly our operating and our maintenance areas. Because if you switch back about 30, 35 years ago, we opened the Spadina subway and we opened the SRT. Well, guess what? The workforce grew by about 25 or 30%. Then you flash forward to today, and we're in the midst of those people retiring plus a normal cohort of retirements. So we kind of have a double cohort of retirements. And some years it's exactly as we predict. Some years it's way more than we predict.
Okay.
It's happening to be one of those years where a lot of people retired more than we expected, but we're much better at it right now this year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nanziata. Before I,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So can you explain to me what standby pay is?
Sure.
And how many hours do they get paid for standby?
So standby pay is where you have somebody who's available if needed. So we have some critical IT systems where we don't have a need for somebody being at work all day long. So, and if there's only one or two people who are the experts in that system, if it breaks down and it's critical to our operation, we might have them on standby. So for example, the Wheel-Trans scheduling computer system. If that system goes down and doesn't get fixed right away, the next morning we are only able to have issued or run the work that was, or the trips that were pre-booked as regular service. So about 60% of Wheel-Trans service is a regular person going to work every day. So if the system goes down, those 60% of the people, those trips will go out because we've got run sheets printed for them. The other 40% of the trips, which are sort of asked for the day before, the demand type trips, we wouldn't be able to produce a run sheet if the Wheel-Trans system didn't work. So what we do is we have the person who's the expert, and there's a couple of them, so they rotate it. The expert on that Wheel-Trans computer system has to be fit for duty. They have to be within half an hour or 40 minutes of work. They have to be able to access the system from home if need be, so that if that critical system goes down, they're able to fix it in time for us to get the run sheets done for the next morning. And on standby, you get paid 1 hour for every 8 that you're on. So they're on a shift, they get paid 1 hour out of that 8-hour shift. And so where we have critical systems like that, that's largely where you'll see the standby pay. It's for highly skilled technical people where we don't have a lot of them, and we might need them because it could affect our service.
So most of them, they're just basically at home?
They could be at home, they could be doing whatever they got to do,
getting
but
paid to
they
be
have
at
to be
home.
fit for duty, which means they can't be drinking, they can't be partying.
How do you monitor if they're drinking or not?
Well,
there somebody there watching them?
They signed their agreement, they signed their agreement with them. If they're called into work and they are not fit for duty, that's a cause for termination at the TTC.
Well,
Thank you, Councillor Nanziata. Next to ask question is Councillor Matlow.
Yeah, just Councillor Nunziata's I think very good questions sparked my interest. So could you just explain again, they're getting paid 1 out of 8 hours?
Yeah, so to be on standby, because we expect them to be fit for duty, close by work,
Yeah.
and available,
Yeah.
that we pay them 1 hour out of every 8 hours. So they're on standby for 8 hours, we'll pay them 1 hour pay to do that.
So they're getting paid for an hour?
They're basically paid 1 hour to be hanging around for 8 hours in case we need them. And we're happy when we don't, because that means the system didn't break down.
And how much would that be, like in that hour? Like
Whatever their hourly rate is.
typically, like
I don't know, if the person's making $40 or $50 an hour, you get $40, $50.
$40, $50, okay, still. Have you ever considered, and I apologize if this seems naive, but to have them do something during that time that might be useful to an organization that has so many different demands?
So if we have them do something during that time, I mean, first of all, these individuals work a full days every day, like they have a regular job. So they work their full work week.
Yeah.
They then have the inconvenience of being sort of hanging around on call if we need them. So if we were to bring them in for an hour, then we probably wouldn't do that. When we call people in, we call employees in, we probably call them in for 4 hours. Because then there's some travel time, there's some real inconvenience to them. We'd probably call them in for 4 hours, and that probably would be, depending on the level, that would be on time and a half. So we look at these things and say to ourselves, okay, what's the most cost-effective way to do it? And we also examine each year whether, if we went a whole year and nothing happened, well, then do we really still even need them on call, right? So we do all those things. To get an employee into the office for 1 hour is a pretty big imposition, certainly if it's on the weekends or in the evenings. I mean, because and then in any case, even if they did come in for an hour and left, we'd still need them in case there's an emergency.
There's something about this that just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, like it may not be directly analogous, but like, you know, in my office, and we all do different things, and we have different expertise in different things, but it's not like any of us will just sit around waiting for somebody to call us. We'll be working on other things, and then if we're needed for a specific project, then we'll go and do that when it's a priority. Why wouldn't we organize it in a way where if we have people who are doing their day jobs, who are trained for whatever we need them to be trained for, and then they're readily available and accessible if we need them to take on a certain project? But why would we have like a certain person with a certain expertise sitting at home watching soap operas? Like, I do not get that.
So if we have, so many of our systems, it's not a single individual. In many of our systems, it's multiple people. And if the system is not critical to our operation and does not affect our customers, we won't have somebody on standby. If it doesn't affect the operation, you're not on standby, all right? So if some internal system goes down, but it's no big deal, somebody will get a call at home and we'll bring them in and they'll fix it, and that's how you deal with that. But if it's something where it's critical to the operation of the system, where the system, public transit may not work, then it's not like we're paying them to sit around. They can do whatever they need to do,
Right.
but they have to report the work if we call. So, you know, I'm on call 24/7, but, you know, I mean, they get hold of me, I come in, but it's not like I'm there for that specific system. So if you've got an individual who's highly skilled, and there's not a lot of them.
I hear you. We're going around in circles a bit, with all due respect. Like, I'm asking the same question, you're giving me this same answer, and I know you're giving me a sincere answer. I submit to you, though, that I still don't understand. I don't understand why we'd set it up that way. Why wouldn't we just have people working for us with certain skills that can be readily accessible to do the job that needs to get done? Or if there are people who have the privilege of working for the TTC, that if we call them and we say we need you, that they wouldn't be saying, I'm only going to come if you pay me to sit around, but rather that they'd actually be very happy to get a job to come in and do it. Is this a result of a negotiated collective agreement that maybe we weren't happy with?
No, I don't think so. I think it's, if we've got, you know, I'm not trying to give you a circular answer, but if we have 1 or 2 people that are critical to keeping the system running, and we would need them, we'd be in a real pickle if that one person was at a party and was unfit to come to work. So if you've got the one person who understands that particular computer system and it affects service, for us to say, okay, for all the time you're off work, you have to be fit for duty. You can't do anything. You can't go to a party. You can't drink.
I'll conclude by this. You may consider, if we have experts in certain fields that we know that we might need the next day, rather than paying them to sit around, we might call them the day before and say, Bob, don't go drinking tonight, because we may need you tomorrow, and if you want the job, don't be hungover. I don't know.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can just try on this.
Go ahead.
So it's not unusual to have standby premiums for staff who are required for critical functionality in a city or in an agency of the city. Usually the premium is not the full shift, it's simply one component. It's like for an hour, you stay on 7 hours, you get an hour's worth of pay so that you are going to stay in the city and you're going to make yourself available in the event. That's very common. We do it in fire. We do it in lots of different places. But it's not the entire one-for-one that they're being required. So they're not sitting home for the 7 hours. They're simply getting a premium to make themselves available and otherwise constrain their...
I get that. I just don't understand why it's necessary. Why is it necessary?
So
Rather than if somebody wants to work for us, that they'd be willing to come in if we ask them to.
Yeah, so in our water systems, where our SCADA systems are, our control systems, we have people that are technical experts in managing that system.
Yes.
And it'll tell us things that a pump failed or a compressor's down, and we need somebody to come in and make an emergency repair.
Right.
We'll have a premium, a shift premium for that worker to come
I
and make
understand
that
the
service
system.
available.
I hear that. I'm not. I don't mean to belabor the point, and I respect that you're explaining the way it works, the way it is. What I'm doing is I'm just challenging the way it works and the way it is. What I'm asking is, I get that's how it's set up. The principle of it, though, if somebody wants to work for the city or the TTC, why wouldn't, if we call on them and say, tomorrow, we need somebody around, so we're going to call a bunch of people like you would do at home. Like you'd call a bunch of, if you need a plumber, you need a carpenter, you need somebody to help you, you'd call them and say, who's available tomorrow? I'd like you to pay you to come in and do it.
Well, it is.
You would never start paying them to just sit around and wait just in case you call.
So it isn't about ones where you know you're going to need them the next day. These are ones that are unexpected. These are completely unexpected circumstances. There are emergencies that you have, there's no predictability about it, and you simply need to have some redundancy in your system because it's far more expensive.
So do we have people on standby every day?
On critical systems, yes.
Every day?
Yeah, on critical systems. We have service providers that also provide emergency functionality for us that are not on our payroll. But there will be some positions, like I say, that water technician, where they're trained specifically in that equipment and that plant. We have to have people that know how to fix things.
And we can't have them doing something.
We have 3 or 4 people that can do that, but one of them's just working the shift. We need to have a second one on standby in case that criticality goes down because the consequences.
I get that, but can't we have them doing something productive during?
They're only getting paid a premium.
Yes.
It wouldn't make sense to have them come in, work an entire shift, and spend 7 or 8 times more money on work that's not needed.
It's a cheaper way.
It's the least expensive way of dealing with the risk.
I hear you, but it just, there's, anyway, I'll digress right now, but I.
Okay, Councillor Holliday, okay, he put up his hand first and then, question.
If the chair would permit another round, but Councillor McMahon, you haven't asked anything.
Are you going to ask questions?
Yes.
Okay.
That's okay,
All right,
thank
go
you.
ahead.
So this is not to do with this standby, it's to do with construction projects, and you're saying that sometimes they don't start on time when you had planned for them to start. So what usually causes a delay in the construction project starting?
So when I talked about capital projects, I wasn't necessarily just referring to a construction project.
Okay,
We have
yeah,
all
got
kinds
it,
of
yeah,
different capital
yeah.
projects. So, I mean, we might have assumed we get approval for a project in March, and maybe the approval didn't come till later in the year. Or maybe, you know, a building permit comes later than we expected. So there's a lot of reasons why there might be some variation. And if there is, we won't, if we know about it, we won't hire until that time, till we need the people. So if a project is delayed for some reason and we need workers for it, and we say, okay, we know that project's delayed for 4 months, well, then we're not going to hire those people for 4 months.
And so what percentage of your projects would you think were able to start when you had planned them, and which ones do you think were delayed?
So we had a few big projects where there were delays last year, and on the bulk of our program, 95% of it was on schedule and done as said. So I was just trying to explain that the gapping number wasn't necessarily related to any significant increase in overtime.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Holiday?
Mr. Chair, if you'll permit, I'd like to do another round of questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Just to revisit the standby pay issue, this is new for me. Can you tell me what the split between unionized workers and management is with respect to the standby pay? I think it's about $1 million. You don't need dollar figures, but empirically.
So I'd have to go back and get the answer to that question, but I think it is largely technical people, and those technical people would largely be non-unionized. So that's what the previous question about whether it was a collective agreement, I don't think so. It's people of the ilk that we've talked about. We've got a SCADA system too that runs our subway. We've got elevators that work in the subway. So it's technical people to keep those things running. I'd have to go back and get a list of the.
So we could set aside like vehicle operators and where you've got large pools of like workers.
Correct.
So it's more management side, salaried people.
So absolutely for vehicle operators like bus drivers, streetcar drivers, there's not a single person on standby for that.
Yeah, you have a different system to manage
There's a different system for
absences because one person can drive here and then go there and
Right.
do different things.
Right.
So this is more on the management side.
Yeah. And it's more on the management side, and it's more for critical systems that affect the service, and it's not to do with, it's not somebody to drive a bus in case it does. There's other mechanisms by doing that. So for standby, we only do it where it's critical and where it's cost effective, and where, as was mentioned before, if our alternative was to bring somebody in for 4 or 8 hours, we'd pay 4 or 8 times what we pay today for work that doesn't need to be done, or there would be somebody assigned to do it.
How often does somebody come in from standby?
It depends on the system. And as I say, we do once a year sit down and say, okay, what happened for the last year? In some cases, if it's common enough that they're being called in, then we got to go back and look at, is there another alternative? So if we had somebody called in every second day, well, then we got to go find out, maybe one person isn't enough. Maybe we need another employee with that skill to actually work the off shift. So if that were the case, you'd go back and say, they're being called in so often, there's so much going on, that we really need a second person or a third or fourth, whatever it is, on that off shift, and we would get the person for that.
Is it every day, once a week, once a month?
I would say it's not every day. I would say it's probably, maybe once or twice a month would be what you'd be looking at.
Do you have a labor dispute contingency plan? And how does that compare to how you cope with standby issues? Without unfolding the whole plan, but if the worker that fulfills the critical role is not available due to a labor dispute, how then do you deal with the situation? Does it go to a more senior manager to deal with the situation, or?
Okay, so I'm not sure whether, we have a collective agreement that dictates when people need to be at work. As long as that agreement's in place, an employee does not have the right at an individual location to refuse work. If they do, there's mechanisms to do that. So none of these standby people, 0 of them, would be there in case an employee decides they don't want to come to work or has some dispute. That's a different thing. If you're scheduled to be in work, that's your job. You don't want to be there, then we'll deal with you as an employee, as a supervisor for you. So none of these people are there because another person it might be a dispute. 0 of that. It's all because if the system goes down, the system's so critical to affect our service, that's the only reason we'd have these kind of people on standby.
I'll make it the last question. Are there any individuals that are so unique, they work the 5 days of the week and then they earn standby for the weekend because they're literally the only person in the organization or maybe one of two people that can do something? So is that literally built right into their work?
So for a lot of these things, and for some of our more complicated, technical, specialized computer systems, like the Wheel-Trans scheduling system, where there's not a lot of them, we have the only one in Ontario, yeah, that's the nature of it. So the system's robust enough that we don't need 4 or 5 systems analysts who know how to fix that system. We've got a couple. So there's always one working during the day and one on standby. So that is the nature of that. And we wouldn't, for us to go and then hire another one to cover the off shift, instead of paying 1/8 of a person's pay, we're going to pay 8/8 of a person's pay, and it's way more expensive.
I'm just getting, I'm worker, I run XYZ system. I'm the only person that runs it in the organization. Maybe my manager knows a little bit about it. So I get my salary and I also get premium with the understanding that literally every weekend I'm on standby, and that's just built into my job.
Yeah, so we try not to have it as a single person solely on standby, because I have to tell you, if you talk to the employees who are on standby, many of them would rather not be on standby. They don't see the premium as any great benefit to the infringement it has on their personal life.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Nanziata.
Well, just one last question. If we moved a motion today that would come back and give us a breakdown for 2014 on the standby pay, on what the jobs, their job description, why we called them in, and if they were part of the sunshine list as well. So if we moved that motion today, you'd be able to bring that information forward?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you. And I do have one last question. How much overtime is attributed to activism?
So I'd have to go back and try and determine that number. It would, most of the overtime we have is a function of shifts that we run. So we have what's called a spread. That means a 13-hour spread. So if you're a bus operator, where we start you in the morning and where we finish you in the afternoon can't exceed 13 hours. That's according to our collective agreement, and it's also in connection with ESA. You got to have a certain amount of time off between shifts, between the start of one and the finish of one and the start of the other. So most of our operators work what's called a split shift. They'll work some shift in the morning rush hour and some shift in the afternoon rush hour, and we take great pains to try and piece the morning and the afternoon work together so it fits within that 13 hours. Sometimes it doesn't fit well within it. So sometimes you're going to have scheduled overtime because we can't put two pieces of work together and get it within 13 hours. So if you can't do that, then you're stuck with some of it going on overtime. So for our operators, we also have what we call the spare board. Rather than just wait for somebody to go off and pay lots of overtime, we have a spare board, which is a statistical calculation we do based on vacations, expected absenteeism, court duties, and every other workers going in for training, other reasons why a driver might not be available to fulfill a shift. Rather than pay overtime, we have what's called a spare board, or a pool of operators, fully trained and available, and they sign up for this. And if this person goes off for vacation this week, that person does their vacation work rather than overtime. We have a small number of those that if we have expected absenteeism, we try to put it in have the spare board do it rather than do it at time and a half. So we try to minimize the impact of absenteeism on overtime. For us, the bulk of it's going to be work that needs to be done, that can't be done during the regular shift, and these kinds of things that we're talking about. So I'd have to go back and look at what amount of that might be overtime, but it would not be anything close to a big portion of it. the big portion of it is scheduled work that we can't fit within those kinds of shifts.
Thank you, and if you can provide that information, much appreciated when you analyze it.
Okay.
Anybody, any further questions? Anybody speak?
I think the staff are preparing that motion that I requested, and just to move
Okay.
that motion.
Anybody else to speak? Waiting for that motion to be prepared? Okay.
I'll
Okay.
simply say that intellectually, I get what the TTC and the acting city manager were saying. And I understand that by definition, we are paying them for a service because they are waiting around to be accessible to us if we need them. I get that. I simply question, respectfully, but I question whether or not there's a better way to do things where we can pay an individual to do more active work during the time that they're receiving money from the city or the TTC. It's just not, the system that's set up is not intuitively the way that I would set it up. I would want to have people with expertise around us that could be available and accessible to us when we need them, but still doing active work during the times that they're actually getting paid. And I just wonder if there is a better way to put this shop together rather than paying people to, even whether they like it or not, but to not actively be doing work to contribute to a system which has a dearth of funds and a dearth of resources and a lot of problems and challenges every day.
Thank you. And Councillor Nanziata, you have your motion? Okay. Anybody have any issues with that request? All those in favor? Carried. And items to receive report as well. Thank you. And that was the last item. Does anybody have any additions? No, saying none. I'd like to thank everybody attending the meeting and thank our Auditor General, our support staff, and all of you.
And thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. I mean, audit is after the fact. All right. I mean, I used to deal with it, and I used to answer to the auditors myself. So it's a tough thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.